preparing for a great war in the east, Emperor Septimius Severus recruited 3 new legions. He was going to fight with Parthia, so the question of how to name fresh combat units there was no question. So in the Roman army appeared in the First, Second, and Third Parthian Legions. The symbol of all 3 legions was a centaur, and it is not by chance, formed legions in the homeland of exuberant mythological creatures, in Macedonia and Thrace. For centuries these Balkan lands were famous for excellent fighters, not without reason. The most formidable conqueror of all times and peoples, Alexander, was a Macedonian, and the most famous gladiator, Spartacus, Thracian. The war in the east against King Vologases showed that the choice of Septimius Severus was correct. Parthians fought better than those legions, which were initially based in Syria and other Asian provinces. The emperor entrusted them with the most difficult tasks. For example, during the siege of the important city of Hatra in Mesopotamia, warriors' Parthian legions always went in the front ranks. True, in the case of Hatra it did not help. To take this city the Romans failed, although they tried to do it twice. North crossed Mesopotamia and made an attack on Hatra, which was not far away but without success. On the contrary, his siege vehicles were burned, many soldiers were killed, and many more were wounded, writes the Roman historian Dion Cassius. The defenders of Hatra, Arabs from the Atran tribe, fought selflessly and skillfully. They, according to the source, hit the Romans from bows and from ballistae, shooting simultaneously 2 massive arrows, poured rows of advancing pots with burning oil. All attempts to storm were repulsed. Once, during the second siege, Hatra almost fell. The legionaries broke through a part of the wall with a battering ram and rushed into the breach, but were stopped by the order of the emperor himself. In this place near the destroyed wall, according to Dion Cassius, there was a temple of the sun, to the brim filled with rich offerings, and the north was afraid that the soldiers plundered it. The emperor hoped that the Arabs, seeing that the Romans are about to break into the city, will throw out the white flag, and gave the enemy 24 hours to think. But the defenders of Hatra used the respite not for reflection, but for hard physical work. Overnight they restored a section of the wall, and the next Roman attack was smothered. Perhaps because the Europeans, as called in the Roman camp soldiers of Parthian legions, to go on a new assault, flatly refused, rightly believing that the day before they were betrayed and left without deserved booty. When none of the defenders of Hatra approached the north with any offers of peace, the emperor ordered the soldiers to storm the wall again, although it had been built again overnight, says Dion Cassius. But the Europeans, who were the only ones of his army capable of doing anything, were so enraged that none of them submitted to the north any longer, and the rest, the Syrians, who were compelled to make the assault in their stead, were destroyed. The failures at the walls of Hatra spoiled the overall picture of Septimius Severus's eastern campaign, but on the whole it was shaping up nicely. At least some long-term dividends to Rome this war did not bring, but the enemy was seriously damaged, and the empire received new territories in the east. The main episode of the campaign was the capture of Ctesiphon, the Parthian capital, which throughout history managed to seize only 2 Roman emperors, Trajan and Septimius Severus. Having descended down the Euphrates on hastily sculled enemy boats, problems with the material at that time was not. The soldiers of the north captured several Parthian cities, visited the ruins of abandoned inhabitants of Babylon and Seleucia, and then stormed the capital of the Parthian kingdom. According to Roman authors, 100,000 inhabitants of densely populated Ctesiphon were sold into slavery. Septimius Severus returned to Rome in a blaze of glory, with rich booty and with a loud title, Parthian Greatest, and about what happened under the walls of Hatra tried not to spread. The emperor was easy to deal with. Once, even during the siege of Hatra, he ordered to behead the committeeman of the Praetorian Guard Julius Crispus, only for the fact that he, frustrated by the protracted campaign, quoted Virgil, "We meanwhile perish for nothing." After the war, the First and Third Parthian legions the emperor left in the east, and the second took with him. His fighters north somehow especially trusted, so the place of permanent deployment of the military unit was chosen Italy, and not just Italy, and the place Alba Longa, in 20 kilometers from Rome. in case of what soldiers in 3 hours could reach the capital. The revolutionary decision to place a whole legion in Italy was born in Septimius Severus, was not born from scratch. Praetorian Guard, permanently based in the Eternal City in the course of the Civil War, stained their hands with the blood of Emperor Pertinax, the predecessor of Severus. So faith Praetorians were no longer. Although the emperor did not abolish the Guard, he dispersed the personnel to distant garrisons. The corps was formed virtually anew from reliable and proven people, and that the Guard henceforth had less room for maneuver, its actions, and had to ensure faithful to the emperor's Second Parthian Legion. In addition, the placement of the legion in Italy had a purely military sense. Under the side of the emperor appeared essentially mobile army, which could be transferred to any place where it is hot. In other words, the Second Parthian Legion, along with the Praetorians, could be used as a mobile reserve. That is exactly how it was used. The soldiers of the Second Parthian under Septimius Severus had to fight in Scotland. Then, under Emperor Caracalla, the legionaries again marched eastward, where the new Augustus waged another war against Parthia, torn at the time by violent turmoil. It seems that Marcus Aurelius Severus Antoninus Augustus, who went down in history as Caracalla, harbored a special weakness for the Second Parthian. The backbone of the legion were Macedonians, and Caracalla was a true admirer of Alexander the Great and everything associated with Macedonia. He flaunted in a wide-brimmed Macedonian hat. His commanders called the names of Alexander's associates. In the army of Caracalla were even units, acting unarmed as the famous Macedonian phalanx. The campaign of Caracalla against Parthia until the time was successful. The Romans were able to kill and plunder at will. However, when the fighting dragged on, and the emperor, despite the grumbling in the army, the return home forbade even to think, a conspiracy was ripe. Caracalla was stabbed with daggers. The emperor was proclaimed Macrinus. He ended the war. True, in order to make peace, the Romans had to wipe themselves after a nightmarish defeat by the troops of King Artabanus at the walls of Nisibis, and the valor of the Second Parthian did not help. Macrinus didn't rule for long. Already soon the Second Parthian Legion returns to its base in Alba Longa with the new emperor, the pervert Heliogabalus. Around the same time, the legion receives the title Eternally Loyal, Faithful, and Happy. In 231st year, a new mission to the east. Second Parthian takes part in the campaign of Emperor Alexander the North against the Sassanids, a dynasty that replaced the Parthian Arsacids in the role of the main rival of Rome in the east. The campaign was without result and ended with the status quo. 3 years later, the Second Parthian Legion is back in Europe, fighting under Alexander the North against the Germanic Alemanni on the Rhine. And a year later, the emperor is killed, and on the throne is the first soldier emperor, Maximinus Thracian, presumably a native of the Second Parthian. Perhaps it was in the legion that a conspiracy against the last representative of the Severus dynasty ripened. Under the command of Maximinus, the soldiers of the Second Parthian fight against the Sarmatians on the Danube, and then move to Italy to suppress the activity of the Senate, which has started another Game of Thrones. However, Maximin does not hold power for long. He is replaced in turn by Gordian. Gordian III, among other legions, leads the Second Parthian to the east to fight the Persians. Between battles, the legion is based at Apamea in Syria. This is evidenced by the soldiers' tombstones with appropriate inscriptions found on the ruins of this ancient city. In the year 249, the legion returned to Europe. Under the command of Philip the Arab, he fights against the tribe of Carps on the Danube border. Then, in the course of another civil war, the Second Parthian oppose other Roman legions, those who supported the next pretender to the throne, Decius. Decius then won and became emperor, but it does not seem to have had much effect on the fate of the Parthians. If there were repressions, they were insignificant. In any case, it is known that in the following years the legion fought under the emperor Gallienus against the Gallic usurper Postumus, and fights well, because at Gallienus receives one after another 3 honorary titles. Gallienus, by the way, generally liked to give out titles to faithful soldiers and loyal legions. The happy years of the Second Parthian end at the beginning of the 4th century. In the war that broke out between the pretenders to the throne Constantine and Maxentius, the legion, still based in Italy, took the side of the latter. In the decisive battle on the Mulvievo Bridge near Rome, the army of Maxentius was defeated. He was not helped neither by the steadfastness of the Praetorians, nor by the valor of the Second Parthian, nor by the abundance in his army of heavy cavalry, cataphractarii and clibanarii. Constantine dealt harshly with those who fought against him. The corps of Praetorians and mounted bodyguards of the Emperor Singularii were disbanded. Got and the Second Parthian Legion. He replaced a cozy nest in Alba Longa on the town of Bezabda in Mesopotamia, on the easternmost edge of the empire. The last 50 years of the Second Parthian Legion, the darkest and most ignominious page of its existence. A quiet life on the frontier could not be by definition. From time to time the legionaries had to repel the onslaughts of Persians and local Arabs. In the 360th year, the Sassanid Shahinshah Shapur II began a great campaign against the Roman Empire. Bezabda was one of the first obstacles in the way of his huge army. The siege of the well-fortified city on the Tigris River lasted about a month. The garrison of Bezabda, consisting of 3 second legions, defended fiercely, repelling several assaults, which occurred daily at first. Casualties were enormous on both sides. A Christian bishop went to the Shahinshah's headquarters and on his knees begged the Persian lord to retreat, but Shapur was determined to take the city by all means, and in the end he succeeded. During the next assault the battering ram, as the Roman historian Ammianus Marcellinus writes, began to tear the connection of stones with its huge point, shook one tower and toppled it together with the defenders. The Persians, like locusts, rushed into the city. Then the terrible thing began. Howling Persians from all sides struck the ears of the surviving defenders, and inside the walls of the fierce battle broke out, describes Ammianus the last hours of the Roman Bezabda. Crowds of enemies and ours fought hand to hand, came face to face with sword in hand, no one was spared. Tensing all their forces, the besieged long left unknown outcome of the battle. Finally they were dispersed by the masses of the invading enemy. Many Romans, both soldiers and women with children, were killed, and the one who survived by order of Shapur was put in chains and sent to the desert. Clanking fetters, dying of thirst, bleeding from the wounds suffered in the brutal battle, the soldiers of the Second Parthian Legion went somewhere far, far away to the east.